Hello, Warhawk. We're going to continue with our review of U.S. history as we prepare for the end of the year, and we're really just trying to synthesize and bring together all of the different things that we've learned about. And so, if you'll remember, we started at the very beginning. We were looking at exploration and colonization, and we talked about the explorers like Columbus and others. And then we continued on looking at the establishment of the colonies, beginning with Jamestown and Plymouth being the earliest of the colonies, and kind of the differences between those colonies. Jamestown primarily being about settling and making money for the Virginia Company of London. And then we have the Plymouth colony, and they were coming here to escape religious persecution because um, they were Puritans, actually even more strict than the Puritans in a lot of ways. They were separatists, and so they came to the New World for a chance to practice their religion the way that they wanted to. After they came, then lots of other Puritans came, and that's the Massachusetts Bay Colony. But people continue to come, and so the 13 colonies are established, and we looked at those on Friday. We'll continue to review some of those things as we go along, but we're going to move forward today and focus on the American Revolution. And so, really, there's several key things we want to talk about. If we think back, one of the kind of the line of demarcation when we stop calling it the colonial era and start calling it the American Revolution is really the French and Indian War. Of course, the in America they were still colonies; they were still part of Great Britain at that time, but that's when a big shift happens. So after the victory during the French and Indian War, and Great Britain gains control of more of the territory in North America, a great deal more territory in North America. Um, Great Britain becomes more concerned with what's going on in here. They recognize the importance of this land and how significant it will be to their ongoing empire and the growth of their nation and their power. And so they are beginning a little bit more of a focus on this region than they had before. And that's one of the things that the colonial period is sometimes talked about as this salutary neglect, where the colonies were there was not a lot of issue going on, and so there was but there wasn't a lot of interest necessarily either. And so the colonies were so far away from Great Britain that they began to kind of develop their own way of doing things. And because it was so far away, Great Britain kind of allows that for a time. Uh, but after the French and Indian War, that period is going to be over. So that's that period of called salutary neglect, where the Great Britain is kind of ignoring the colonies. They're not really heavily involved in the governing of the colonies. The king certainly still rules, but they're not taking that active a role. Sometimes that's over exaggerated, but that concept is certainly there. So after the French and Indian War, they recognize the importance of this territory for their ongoing success. And there's this conflict that keeps happening between the colonists and Native Americans. And this is bringing about war and bloodshed and trouble, and war is very expensive, and Great Britain doesn't want to continue with these wars. And so of 1763, which is a line that basically right over the Appalachian Mountains saying you cannot cross into this territory. Colonists, you should not move over there. That is Native American land. We don't want to see fighting with them. We don't want to encroach on their territory. The colonists almost immediately ignore that. They've already been over there, so many people are actually being told to move and leave that region west of the Appalachians after they've set up a homestead and begin a new life west of the Appalachians. And so the colonists are upset by this, but not all. Lots of colonists, it doesn't impact them at all. But many colonists are angered by this law. Um, At the same time, how are they going to enforce this? Well, they decide, you know what, we're going to keep some soldiers here in North America. We're going to keep a significant number of soldiers here, and those soldiers are here for the protection of the Native Americans and for the protection of the colonists, to kind of keep them separate, to enforce this law in one sense. And so, because they're here for this reason, they are going. We expect the colonies to pay for them. Well, at this time, it was not common to keep a standing army like this in the colonies. They didn't want that, and they certainly didn't want to pay for it. And so Great Britain passes the Stamp Act, and so Great Britain begins passing a series of taxes on the colonists. One tax, as we said, is called the Stamp Act, and it was a tax on paper goods and things of that nature. The colonists felt this was unfair, that they had to pay taxes to the British government because they did not have any representation, or they didn't get to vote for representatives in Parliament. Now, they weren't necessarily asking for that. They really, what they wanted is, they just didn't want Parliament to have the right to tax them. They wanted their colonial assemblies to be able to tax them. So the colonists were angry because they believed in this idea of the consent of the governed. Consent is just another kind of word for permission. In other words, we, the governed, that the people that the government is over, we give them the right to rule us because they have our permission. And they get our permission by the very fact that we get to vote for them. And so this concept of the consent of the governed, or is all the way back to this time. And so the British, the people in America and Great Britain, they believed in this concept that they shouldn't be that somebody shouldn't rule over you without your permission. And this idea is called the consent of the governed. Another way that this is expressed at this time is no taxation without representation. In other words, you can't tax me if I can't vote for you or vote you out of office. And so that's the consent of the governed. It's the same idea, it's just expressed in a different way. No taxation without representation. So the Stamp Act is kind of the first big one. It's not that really the very first one, but it's kind of the first big tax that was really upset. This got the colonists upset. They're protesting. We have the Sons of Liberty that are upset about these taxes and things of that nature. And that is, then there's a series of other taxes like the Townsend Acts that put tax on lead and glass and tea and things of that nature. Tensions continue to rise. Tension between the colonists and Britain increased. The colonists protested the Tea Act. So because the Townsend Acts were not popular, they end up taking those away, except for the tax on tea. They keep the tax on tea. And so the colonists just stopped drinking the tea. Well, the tea companies in Great Britain are doing poorly, and particularly the British East India Company, and so they allow this company to come to America to sell exclusively here. Bostonians are upset about this, and the Sons of Liberty organize a protest, and they dump the tea into Boston Harbor. So the Tea Act leads to the Boston Tea Party, which leads to the Intolerable Acts, which is the punishment for destroying like $1 million worth of tea. It was $1 million worth of tea in today's money, not in their money of that time. And so this tensions really escalate after this. The Boston Tea Party is kind of the turning point in a lot of ways of things. Maybe things will work out with the Boston Tea Party and then the Intolerable Acts, or they're also called the Coercive Acts. That really ends it seems in retrospect, from our perspective, that was the turning point. That's what really escalated things much higher and made it very unlikely for there to be any kind of peaceful resolution to this. While the Americans are responding to this and getting upset about this with the First Continental Congress and responding, they're preparing for the potential for war and fighting. Well, while they're preparing, gathering weapons and things of that nature, training, a group of troops are sent to arrest some of the leaders and get the muskets and other weapons that they're stockpiling, and the battles of Lexington and Concord happen. And this is the beginning of the war. This is the shot heard round the world, this explosion of violence. There's no guarantee that ultimately it will still be war, but it does. This is the beginning of the fighting. And so that's in 1775. So over the course of the next year, the colonists are kind of figuring out what this fighting really is all about, and ultimately it is declare that the colonies declare independence on July 4th, 1776. That when the document is approved, they actually declare a little before that, but we don't need to get into those details. So they're saying, hey, we're independent, we are separate from Britain, and this is kind of the key. Uh, First major battle is the Battle of Bunker Hill. There's a lot of other fighting that happens. The turning point in the war is the Battle of Saratoga. It's a victory. A major British army is captured in Saratoga, New York, and so this is a huge thing. The French, who have been secretly kind of undercover helping, they now become our allies officially and declare their support for the Americans. And this is key because the French Navy in particular is going to be essential to victory, because the Americans don't have much of a navy, and so getting this navy, the French Navy's naval support, is going to be very helpful and important ultimately. And it comes to bear in the last major battle, which is the Battle of Yorktown, where General Cornwallis has his men actually trapped out on a peninsula, and he doesn't think they're trapped because he expects the British Navy to be able to show up and they can escape. But before the British Navy gets there, the French Navy arrives, and the second major army is now captured. And this ultimately leads to the end of the war and the Treaty of Paris, which is not signed until 1783, even though Yorktown is 1781. So it takes some time before the fighting stops and before the treaty is ultimately agreed upon. All right, so that's kind of the American Revolution. Those are kind of some of the big parts of the American Revolution. Let me know if you have any questions.